go.
Yeah.
We got a quantum.
Totally. Yeah, it's like, do after that.
Right. Call the meeting to order. Roll call.
Ms. Mucko?
Here.
Mrs. Garrett? Mr. Walker?
Here.
Mr. Erkins?
Here.
Mr. Rastegar?
Here.
Are there any changes or additions to the agenda? Nope. Okay, moving on to approval of the minutes dated April 28th, 2026.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Cody, Stephanie, monthly activity report.
Madam Chair, directors of the board, thank you for your time today. The exciting month of April, we had a really great month, so I get a chance to get into that. As you'll notice, I took out the highlights with the photos because Julie had done such a great job of adding in more photos into her slides from the operational updates that I felt we were duplicating a little bit, so I dropped out the highlights, but you get plenty of photos later on in the report. As far as the monthly events to report for last month for April, just want to really kind of highlight the numbers here in particular for FY 2026. We did 35 total events. So if you look at the prior year, we did 33 and 25. But ultimately what you'll see inside of the revenues as I get to those, 14 banquets, so 6 over the prior year, and then also 6 over on the convention. So if you just look at those alone, those are our largest revenue generating events. So doing 10 less meetings, 6 more banquets and 6 more conventions. So getting a total of 12 more events and only dropping 10 meetings off the calendar is a great utilization, number one. But also it really led to a very, very successful month. So kudos to the team, the sales team, the local side, both took a full kind of team effort to get the month that we got in April. What I'll speak to is the attendance is something that we can't control. So we forecasted about 15,000 for April. And we're sitting at about 14,000. So again, that impacts economic impact numbers, but overall, the types of events that we held really did drive a lot of revenue for the organization. So the April event attendance total was about 14,000. RTI at Work Institute brought in about 17,000 over 3 days, or not 17,000, 1,700 over 3 days. Sustainable Trails Conference, about 1,100 over the course of 4 days. And then Idaho's Best Awards, 915, and then going down from there with Boys and Girls Club on a one-night event at 815 people. And then Idaho Education Association. Overall guest satisfaction scores continue to be extremely strong. We've yet to have, I'm going to knock on wood here, any 3s, but we've had 4 number 4s come in and 45 out of the total 49 giving us a 5 out of 5 on our overall guest satisfaction score. So the team continues to do an outstanding job of delivering great quality of service to those that come into the building, and the clients are happy. On our market strategy, again, this just kind of echoes the whole statement of the report this month in particular, but the team is performing extremely well for the fiscal year this year on its goals for year to date. So future booked revenue sitting at about 65% of the goal at 3.1 million. Future booked economic impact about 70% of the goal at 13.2, and then future booked room nights sitting about 73%. Really great month last, and you'll get a chance to see some of these photos, but we hosted Smart Meetings Innovation Experience April 19th through the 21st. So some of us were up at the leadership conference while the team here was hosting Smart Meetings, and Julie kind of played both, and she played the host here and then drove up to the leadership conference to join us for that. But this took Visit Boise, Grove Hotel, Boise Center as kind of the main sponsors, bringing in 42 clients and 51 suppliers. So a really great opportunity to showcase Boise just as a whole from the industry side. And then they also had the Foundation of Veterinary Dentistry confirmed for October of 2028. Really great piece of business of about 2,400 room nights. So you start seeing these in the metrics that I present each time. But again, all these percentages I just spoke to, the team is performing really, really well from the prior year, but also to the goal, outperforming what the expectations are. So really proud of the team on that side. Again, Smart Meetings, a really good opportunity for Boise to just showcase itself as a destination. Those 42 potential clients and the 51 suppliers. Now 51 suppliers are people like us that are getting a chance to kind of showcase to the clients what the potential of their destinations are. Julie did a great job speaking to the event. Here's some kind of pictures of the food and beverage. They've got a nice tour of the Blue. And then also the stage setup was just beautiful, in particular, bringing in a little bit more of an elevated experience for that group and kind of putting on a little higher level decor onto the stage. And again, Visit Boise, Grove Hotel, Boise Center, all kind of partner on that effort to get that type of effect. On the operational updates, Grove Plaza was very, very busy as we've kind of gone into our spring events and summer events. We had a dinner for moved from 420 due to weather. So we had one that was out on the plaza that was supposed to be, had to be moved inside. The Sustainability Trails event rearranged equipment on the Grove Plaza due to the weather. And then Smart Meetings was hosted out there as well. So 3 opportunities, but again, at this time of year, and we always tell this to clients, having a contingency plan for an indoor option. You never know what you're going to get in those spring and fall times in Boise, but our team does a great job of adjusting. As far as the total month itself, 35 events and 58 event days. This is the most event days since October of 2019. So those that remember, we used to do over 320 events a year, far less revenue generating, but what that did to the team was a lot of turns, a lot of flips. We're kind of back to that number of flips, but with the revenue to back it up. So extremely happy to report on that. On the in-house food and beverage, again, similar, some highlights from some of the events, but Boys and Girls Club, a Delta or a Phi Gamma Delta pig roast, and then a new marketing video kind of photos here. But Sustainable Trails Conference brought in over 90,000 in just food and beverage spend. Boys and Girls Club brought 815 plated meal. Really great event there. But this month alone was 128,000 more than what was forecasted in the budget, and I'm pretty close to budget. And then 180,000 more than the 2025 actuals. So again, we were seeing this month on the books. This is a big reason why I forecasted a record year. But April just outperformed even what my forecast had on it. So with that, as you'll see, what April did is a 1.3, almost a $1.4 million month, which is a record April for us from a revenue generating standpoint. If you take a look at the prior years, we were sitting in that just barely breaking $1 million in April. I remember when the first time that we broke it in 2024 was the first time we broke $1 million. So just seeing that number at a 1.4, kudos to the team. I know it was felt by all the service departments and the finance team trying to close the books. But sitting really, really strong. We're about 1.4% above budget. So I corrected from being below budget last month to now being above budget due to the really strong month of April. And we're about 84,000 above budget on the total year to date. So still sitting very close within our forecasted revenues, but April was just a boon of a month. What that does for the gross profit margins, really, really strong number there. We're continuing to drive those stronger up as we get into our fall and we get really busy, but also the margins get a little bit pinched when we get that busy into the fall. And then also as summer, you start seeing a little bit of those gross profit margins get eaten away in July and August as we're not as busy. So this sets us up really well for our fiscal year goal at 22%, sitting at almost 25% year to date. On the economic impact side, again, I would just really point to that orange bar right there next to April. And if you take a look at the 2 prior years, the economic impact really, really strong compared to the prior 2 years. But again, the past 2 months in particular have been above the prior 3 years. So if you're taking a look at how economic impact is continuing to be one of the top metrics that we report here and also pay attention to, just recognize that the efforts of the revenue generation mixed with that economic impact. Some of this is the event scoring, the booking strategies, but I just recognize the efforts of the team. This is coming out as what we would expect from the efforts that we've put in on the front end. So we're sitting at 50% of the goal, just shy of a month of the halfway through the fiscal year. So sitting really well for our fiscal year goal on economic impact. All of that's fed in from the same kind of data, which is the lodging room revenue. So these are the total room revenues, not district revenues, but total within the district boundaries of all the revenues. So I want to make that clear, but they came in just over 19,809,000 for the month of April. And then demand, another really strong indicator. So again, 3 months in a row that the demand has been outperforming. So when I was starting to see that kind of cooling off, as I spoke to earlier in the year, I think we're starting to see a really good correction happen in the positive side for the hotel occupancy and demand. So I'm excited to continue to see that trend. But I would just really speak to March and April. Having the type of activity that we did mixed with the local events is pretty unique compared to prior years. So just a great job of pairing up the business from the sales team with the local side. And then as you get into the occupancies and ADRs, I really like to highlight over the top of these just so you can kind of see what it's been happening because it gets into these dots and they kind of sit over the top of each other. When you take a look at April from a FY24 from occupancies, we had a dip in 25, as you'll notice, went all the way down to 66%, but it rebounded heavily up almost up to 76%. So the prior height before that was in 2024, sitting about 72%. So to be sitting at 75.6, really strong on the occupancy side. Similar story from the prior months, as you're going to see, there was a little leveling off. Really great month in April here. And then ADR, same thing, about $3, a little over $3 from the prior year over what they were. Yeah, we saw a little bit of a dip in 25 on occupancy and a little from 24. So again, great recovery for April and 26. And then these are just the static slides. These will be what we're forecasting at the end of the year. And it looks like you're seeing still a little slight leveling, but a slight uptick in occupancies and ADRs. Few district updates. Construction on the aquatics facility parking lot began this month. So I've seen, actually I saw a photo from Friday. There's some mounds of dirt that are all torn up. So they started on the 18th, this last Monday, and they're currently in the process with the goal of finishing up about the first week in July. So that 4th of July week to get things wrapped up. Final audit report from Eide Bailly to present it at the June board meeting. So this is just for a note for the board. This is exactly how we did it last year. We will get the statements which we got from Eide Bailly already that will turn over to Zion's Bank to make sure we're in compliance for what their needs are. And then we will have the audit report from Eide Bailly next month, just like we did last year for the approval process. I know I met with the board chair and myself with a potential candidate as we were looking at forming the Idaho Auditorium Districts Association. So some form of alliance now that there are 5 different auditorium districts throughout the state. I think there's an opportunity for us to kind of lead the way with what we know already, but also kind of just as a group, we can all learn from each other. So I think there's an opportunity here that I'm going to continue to go down the road of looking at forming an association of Idaho Auditorium Districts. I think the intent would be to kind of, we've got a scope of work from someone that could potentially be an executive director of that association, and then start looking at how to, based off of the tax revenue generated in each of those different auditorium districts, having them pay a portion of the dues based on those tax revenues. So those will change going forward. More to come, very early stages on this, but extremely excited about the future opportunity that exists here. And then I'll just kind of speak to, I'm wrapping up my directorship with IABM Region 4. This August, I will finalize my total of 7 years of volunteer work with the association. My last 2 have been at the director level. And so I get a chance to wrap up in August as we go into the international meeting, but I did get a chance to plan as the final thing of my director role is putting on the Region 4 conference in Spokane, Washington. Really great opportunity there to kind of see facilities of other types that don't exist in Boise, in particular exhibit hall space and their convention space. The podium is a multi-purpose sports. Learning how they kind of pair the podium along with their exhibit hall space for tournaments is also was an interesting component. So they're able to do even larger than some of those kind of tier 2, tier 1 markets are for tournaments, because they've got 100,000 square feet of exhibit hall space as well as 100,000 square feet at the podium. So they have 200,000 square feet for sports tourism. But it's an interesting, all the facilities are very close, walkable along the river. Just an interesting kind of data set for us to compare to as we go forward and look at expansion opportunities, but really great time in Spokane. With that, I'll stand for any questions from the board.
Any questions? Okay, Stephanie?
Sorry. Now you're fine. All right, good afternoon. As Cody mentioned, Boise Center is outperforming the budget by about $85,000. District right now is about 5. He spoke to the economic impact and how amazing all of that is going, along with what we budgeted. The discounts so far that have been applied, I like this slide in that it's kind of like a return on investment. The discounts right now are about $232,000. The board had approved a budget for $467,000 worth of discounts. So right now everything's looking really good as far as that economic impact. Boise Center operating transfers last month for just operating, $348,000 was transferred for Boise Center. There was $10,000 for capital projects. It's not shown here. $142,000 for the lease payment. And then, as the board knows, with the purchase of, there was another transfer. There was about 400 or 300, 3.3. The option, yeah. Hotel tax collections. April came in at 1.1 million, and we are just about $2,000 above the year-to-date budget for that for the last 5 months. Boise Center capital transfers. The budget was $2.17 million to date. We've transferred 1.75 million, so that's just shy of the 45
It's a 3.9 total budget.
Oh, that's
2.1
I do this
remaining right now.
every
I need
time.
to put
We have got to change this slide. Every time. Yes, 3 points. So 1.75 has been spent. I was looking over at all of the capital projects and I'm like, there's no way. The chairs just came in. So, yes, you're right. 3.19. Thank you. Cash position right now, for the district, we're sitting at the, total available for projects is 31.2, just shy of $31.3 million.
Is this after we've spent the money for the option and for the?
This is as of April 30th. So no,
So some.
you're gonna have another, the 865 is in there. You're gonna have the 3.3 come out
Okay.
after. Yeah, that'll reflect in next month's cash position.
I was thinking, dang, we're doing good.
I know. Still doing really good though, because of a lot of the interest income that's being accrued between the sweep accounts that we have with Wells Fargo and what is the investments. As we're moving, they are still sitting in a cash account and acquiring that interest. So the net income for April was, $95,000.
With the interest being the 88.
The 88,000, yes.
Then I'll just quickly provide an update because it speaks to that. The board and myself have been negotiating as what the board has approved me to do with the purchase and sell agreement on the 11th and River parcel, working with that seller on potentially a later closing date. So we're working on a second amendment to that agreement. This will be a benefit to the seller, but also to the district as we do have some leases in place in there, and particularly one long-term lease that's on the site that the seller is potentially interested in moving with the potential new location for them. So giving them some extended terms to close would allow us to continue to see the investment or return on investment from our dollars before closing. And I think we're looking at August of 2027 at this point, extending that out.
Extending it out, they have an option to close with 30 days notice.
Correct. So they could notify any time between now and then, 30 days to us, then where we would pull our cash. And then
So I know
could
we
go
had the automatic 2 30-day extensions, but this is a new.
a new
agreement.
extension on top of
Okay.
that, where it would be mutually beneficial for both
Okay.
parties. So.
We had done a great deal of transfers of our investments already, moved in preparation for that purchase. So working with Clearwater right now on getting that money reinvested, so it's not just earning a 3%, but somewhere a little, or 3.5%, somewhere a little higher than that. So.
And if we know a
If-
target date.
Yeah,
Right.
if the target date is the moving target right now. So, but we will get that pinned down and then those funds reinvested until we have a confirmed closing date.
Okay.
Any questions? Anything else?
I need to sign something for the audit for you for the end of the month.
I'm sorry, say that again.
I need to sign something for the audit.
The
Great.
Zion, yes, the
Yes.
Zion. Once it is with Eide Bailey right now, the financial statements need to be approved by their third-party reviewer. We should have that in the next day or two.
Okay.
But the team, Maria and I have been working on the other paperwork that needs to go with that, and then we will. Anna will reach out to you and get your
Okay.
signature.
You can
I
do
do-
that digitally.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we
All
should,
right.
yeah.
And just by the end of the month.
Yes.
Right. Yes. Okay. Any other questions? All right. With that, I'd entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Second. Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Mike and Cody, the reimbursement
I'll let Mike kind of kick off the
resolution.
explanation of the reimbursement.
Sure. Madam Chair and board members, this is a relatively, technical, I wouldn't say it's an IRS requirement. Well, it is an IRS requirement in terms of being able to reimburse yourselves for future projects. And as Cody just, mentioned in terms of when we're going to purchase the property, when the property purchases will be complete, they extend, could be any time from July of this year to August of the following year, depending on how all that shakes out. And the Internal Revenue Service generally, assuming we ultimately do a financing for a project, the Internal Revenue Service only lets you reimburse yourselves for amounts that were incurred 60 days prior to whenever your bond issue would be. Or if we adopt this reimbursement resolution, then effectively from 60 days prior to that. So to the extent that we spend any money over the next year and a half on a future project, then maybe a year after that, we actually borrow money. At that point, we can then go back and reimburse ourselves if the board thinks that makes sense. All we're trying to do is provide the board with as much flexibility as possible when there's a financing that's finally put in place. And that's the one reason I think you'll see in the resolution is that up to borrowing up to $150 million. And I think the point there is that if the financing doesn't take place until 2.5 or 3 years down the road, depending on once you all decide what your project is and the scope of it, obviously, depending on inflation and everything else, that may be the size of the project. I think, you just don't know, but we wanted to give you all that amount of flexibility. The last thing I'd point out in the resolution is it's relatively general in its description, because again, I know the board has and I guess it's getting an update from Johnson Consulting on that feasibility report, but because it covers all the options that you all have discussed, from performing arts to exhibit space, to sporting facilities. Again, we don't have a specific description. We want to ensure that the board's got flexibility to pick and choose whatever option it wants without having to deal with any IRS limitations.
It does have a 60-day look back period to capture the expenses that we've spent the past 2 board meetings for the approvals. As well.
60 days from today.
Yes.
Okay. Any questions regarding this? So as I understand it, it's just for the IRS, gives us flexibility for what we do in the future.
Yes.
Great.
Move to approve the reimbursement resolution as written.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
The other thing, actually, Madam Chair, I probably should mention is that this doesn't commit the board to do anything. This just provides you the flexibility and the options.
Yep.
And, if ultimately you decided you wanted to go another route entirely, you're able to.
Perfect. Great. Thanks for doing that, Mike. All right, on to other business. Is Johnson Consulting online?
Yes. So I'll give a minute to our AV team to queue up John Fleming and Ryan Johnson from Johnson Consulting, who I believe they've reported in person. They did our presentation of findings, and you guys have met these folks. This is for that second scope of work where I gave some high-level kind of takeaways to just get the board the information that it was, but I wanted to have Johnson actually come present the final presentation of findings of that scope, as well as to allow any questions that they may have before we take any draft off of it, because we've had it up on our website under the future of the district section. So we would like to take the draft off after today's meeting. Just want to give you a chance to ask questions and have them present the report themselves. So John, are you there? Ryan, are you there?
Yep. Yeah. Hello, good afternoon. How y'all doing?
Good. Oh, there you are.
Can you hear us all right?
Yep. And we've got you on the screen so we can see you.
Perfect. John will pull up the slides and we'll get underway here. So as he's doing that, just thank you all for your time today. Really, as Cody outlined, here to present our phase 2 findings. So our first phase really evaluated the overall market opportunity, regardless of the site location. So that really identified the maximum supportable square footage of spaces that could be supported for an expansion or a new facility. So this scenario, or this phase rather, really looks at 3 different scenarios: a vertical expansion at the current Boise Center, then also 2 other scenarios, the third of which is a new location strategy. So as we get underway, I'll just reintroduce myself, Ryan Johnson with Johnson Consulting. I've been serving as the principal for this project, and I lead our convention center and hospitality practice. John, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you, Ryan. John Fleming, I'm a project manager with Johnson Consulting. And as Ryan and Cody mentioned, we've been working with the Auditorium District for over a year now, which has been an absolute pleasure. And so excited to present sort of our findings from this initial round of analysis today to you all. we have some information that is fairly dense. So at any point, if anybody from the board has a question, feel free to just chime in. And then we also have a lot of time at the end of the presentation for questions and discussion, any items that you might have. So just to kind of brief you on our agenda, starting with an introduction, covering some of the work that we did previously, and then an overview of the scenarios that we looked at, and then really just getting a little bit more deep into the specific findings of that scenario analysis, and then summarizing some of the key takeaways and next steps from our perspectives. So starting with that introduction and scenarios overview, as you all know, we worked on a market and feasibility study last year for the auditorium district, looking at a number of different land use possibilities and, really trying to evaluate their feasibility, not just from a general market standpoint, but also specifically for the auditorium district, keeping in mind the organization's goals and needs and financial sustainability, et cetera. And so, one of the things we recommended was a substantial expansion of Boise Center, as well as development of an indoor sports facility. And those were both sort of driven by, an evaluation that there are gaps, significant gaps in the Boise market, both for convention space as well as tournament sports and sports tourism space. However, what we were somewhat agnostic about in our report was, how to execute those from a land area standpoint. So thinking about, how would you expand Boise Center? As you all know, it's a building that is somewhat limited in terms of adjacent parcels that aren't already built up, right? So figuring that out is a real conundrum, certainly. And then likewise with that indoor sports facility, looking at where do we actually do this? I think, that's really one of the next steps here. And so Cody and the team at Pine Street Group as well sort of brought us into this current phase of work, which, as Cody alluded to, was really, trying to understand some various expansion scenarios. So, how would they project to perform? And from a projections and economic impact standpoint, what are the pros and cons of each of the scenarios? So just to review those expansion scenarios, and in all things here, we're sort of talking relative to our initial recommendation. And when I say our initial recommendation, I think this really kind of represents what we see as the market opportunity, is that initial recommendation. And then scenarios 1, 2, or 3 are sort of ways that you could achieve that market opportunity, but sort of reconciling that with the physical realities of Boise Center and the sort of land area surrounding it. So the initial recommendation was a total expansion of, an additional 100,000 square feet of exhibit space, contiguous, and then an additional 40,000 square feet of ballroom space and 20,000 square feet of breakout meeting rooms to bring the total functional square footage of the building. And that's really rentable square footage is how we define that. So exhibit hall plus ballroom plus meeting room to just over 224, or to just under 224,000 square feet. Then in terms of the scenarios that we actually analyzed, one was scenario 1, which included sort of a stacked exhibit hall scheme. So still achieving the additional 100,000 square feet of exhibit hall space, but in a configuration where you'd have 60,000 square feet on one floor and 40,000 square feet on a second floor, and then not adding the ballroom and meeting room component that we recommended in the initial feasibility study. Scenario 2 was just a smaller exhibit hall expansion. So adding a 50,000 square foot exhibit hall on sort of grade level, the ground floor, but not sort of achieving that full 100,000 square feet. And then scenario 3 was looking at a phased approach on a secondary location, so sort of a satellite site to Boise Center, and looking at in a first phase primarily building that satellite location around a full 100,000 square foot contiguous exhibit hall on one story, and then in a second phase, adding the 40,000 square feet of ballroom space and 20,000 square feet of meeting room space initially recommended, such that when you get to the total square footage, we're talking about, in this case, obviously the existing Boise Center plus the satellite facility, you would reach the same achieved level of function space as the initial recommendation, however, spread across 2 sites. So, those were sort of the 3 pieces that we were looking at. And again, always tying it back to the initial recommendation and what we projected based on our market analysis in the report we produced last year. So diving into that scenario analysis and kind of going piece by piece here, we organized this sort of around the different categories that we projected. So a lot of numbers on the screen, but I'll try to sort of highlight the key pieces in the bullets on the left. And then, this is also broken down a lot further in the report draft that we produced. But, looking at the three scenarios, I think in terms of the different event categories, what we see is, as you'd expect, an overall drop in the volume of events as we look at some of the smaller scenarios by square footage relative to the initial recommendation. We see sort of convention activity being fairly stable across each scenario. Scenario 3, once that's fully built out, would have maybe a larger volume of convention or conference events just due to having multiple spaces, an opportunity for concurrent events. In scenarios 1 and 2, we see sort of we would project sort of a limited number of trade shows available in those scenarios relative to the initial recommendation, and that's primarily just because with the lower amount of contiguous space in the exhibit hall, you're less able to host those types of events, relative to, sort of a larger contiguous space, that 100,000 square foot contiguous space. In really all scenarios, 1, 2, and phase 1 of 3, we would see little growth in the meeting volume, except once you hit the second phase of scenario 3, then again, looking at the concurrency of space, that's opening up a lot more dates on the calendar. So both meetings and banquets would see some degree of growth at that point. And then I think, if we look at this on an overall basis, we see scenario 3 as kind of having the strongest long-term event growth potential, again, outside of that initial recommendation. So, from an event standpoint, scenario 3 achieves most of what we see as possible from the market. And I think a part of how it achieves that as well is by targeting some of that sports tourism component. So, we mentioned at the beginning that was one of the land uses that we saw as really viable. So even though this is focusing on, quote unquote convention space, it's really sort of exhibit hall and can be very flexible space. We see very frequently large exhibit halls hosting, major volumes of sports tourism. And so I think, we would see that as being certainly a part, if a satellite facility were to be built that was centered around an exhibit hall, certainly a part of that equation would be a pretty considerable sports tourism presence. We do project that to wind down as scenario 3 sort of fully develops in its second phase, just as you kind of refocus the program of events in that building more towards convention and conferences, which do tend to be a little bit higher impact from a room nights and an economic impact standpoint. So go ahead, Ryan, sorry.
Well, no, I think you're right on target. Just really important to emphasize the winding down of the sports tourism focus and really refocusing on the convention and trade shows. And I think also in the phase 1 of scenario 3, in that kind of first instance of its existence, it'll also drive and really help the hotels during the weekends as well, which is also one of the areas of focus as well.
I'll just kind of jump in here real quick, guys. I'll just kind of add some context to that because that conversation has been one that I've even had with the mayor and ongoing about sports tourism in downtown Boise. Is that really the destination for sports tourism? And I think the opportunity exists more short term than it does longer term, because I do see the Valley solving some of that need towards the Meridian or Nampa side of things. Naturally, families are looking for price points that have a lot of restaurants that could be more family friendly in nature, as far as not that the downtown restaurants aren't, but those kind of franchise type of restaurants that are a little bit closer on the price point, hotel price points, all of that. So I think there's an opportunity here within this data, when I look at it, to take advantage of sports tourism for a certain portion of time, or when markets or the timing is right, when the economy is kind of maybe less conventions, something else to focus on. But also as the Valley continues to grow, really sets us up well to take advantage of it in the first 5 to 10 years, and then really shift away if there is another solution that exists within the Valley for that, and really focus on conventions when more hotels hopefully have come along and built. So just a little contextual piece.
Thank you,
Sorry, guys.
Cody. Yeah, that's exactly, kind of our thinking. So thank you for clarifying that. Yeah. So that is sort of where we see, why we didn't model in, a significant sports tourism presence in those scenarios 1 and 2. Well, for one thing, the limitation on the flat floor exhibit space from a contiguous standpoint, but another because we're talking about those being directly adjacent to or attached to Boise Center. And so if you get to a satellite location, suddenly there's maybe more opportunity for parking. You're maybe looking at a slightly different grouping of hotels, but also, with that larger contiguous space, the opportunity is a lot stronger for sports tourism. So shifting to sort of projected attendance, and I would say generally speaking, this tells a very similar story. Scenarios 1, 2, achieving sort of progressively less attendance relative to the market opportunity, which is that initial recommendation. And then scenario 3, getting closer to that once it hits sort of its second phase of expansion and builds out that full program of spaces. The biggest hits in attendance, obviously, relative to the total market opportunity would be coming in conventions, trade shows, consumer shows, really anything that, requires that largest quantity of sort of flat floor exhibit space. Something to note, however, is that, all 3 scenarios, 1, 2, and 3 would see attendance increase relative to, what we saw in fiscal year 24 at the existing Boise Center. So it's not to say that, by adding 50,000 square feet of exhibit space or 100,000 square feet broken across 2 levels, you're not achieving any growth relative to existing. You're achieving very substantial growth. It's just, less than maybe what we see as the market opportunity, if that makes sense. Again, during that phase 1, we'd see a lot of opportunity to bring in attendance via sort of sporting events, sports tourism events. And then, as that scenario 3 sort of expands into its phase 2, shifting that market so that it's more focused around conventions and conferences and ends up achieving, 95% or so of the overall attendance that we projected for the total market opportunity in that initial recommendation. And then room nights, I think that's a really key metric to sort of focus on here. And again, very similar story. 1 and 2, progressively fewer room nights. And I think where this is really critical to highlight is that, of all the event types that we're looking at here, that Boise Center currently hosts, as well as, beyond, we're looking at actual ratios of overnight stays generated per attendee. So you can see that the convention or conference is by far the most impactful event type from a room night standpoint. So, thinking about one of the goals of the auditorium district being to generate hotel tax and sort of support that, component of the economy as well as its own financial sustainability, focusing on room nights is really key. And a good sort of way to think about this in terms of convention or conference relative to sports tourism is that, we'd be projecting for year 5, you're projecting about 100,000 room nights for scenario 3 in the convention and conference category, and about 55,000 in indoor sports tournaments. Or the attendees, excuse me, not room nights. But if you look at that relative to room nights, room nights for convention and conference off of 100,000 attendees is over 50,000 versus, room nights for sports tournaments out of 55,000 attendees is just over 3,000. So that's where you see the delta. It's not that it can't be impactful, and it certainly is, but, sports tournaments, it tends to be more family oriented. They're putting more people per hotel room, right? You're packing 4 or 5 people into a hotel room oftentimes. And so, it's a lower impact proposition than what we'd be seeing with a convention focused venue, right? And again, with scenario 3, as it builds into phase 2, we would project it to approach the initial recommendations, room night performance projection, achieving, a pretty substantial component of that, albeit not all of it. And then, just to highlight some of the financial performance components of this, because we did look at this on a profit and loss pro forma basis. And so again, same scheming here where we're looking at the last 3 fiscal years of Boise Center performance that we analyzed in the initial marketing feasibility study. And then also looking at, sort of the initial recommendation, that's sort of what we would see as the market supportable level of financial performance. And then scenarios 1 and 2. And in this case, we just looked at scenario 3's phase 2 because that is really more reflective of an apples to apples comparison, because we're looking at year 10 for each of these. So each of these is in a fully stabilized scenario, and there's not any sort of inflationary factors that are sort of confusing these numbers. So you can really think about these on an apples to apples basis. Again, similar to the attendance and events, we're looking at progressively less revenue, less income on a net basis in scenarios 1 and 2. Scenario 3 does sort of achieve slightly higher rental revenue, both because of the indoor sports tournaments as well as the newness of that facility at the offsite. But we also sort of factored in some higher expenses for scenario 3. So greater degrees of rental discounts because you're talking about challenges associated with moving conventions or splitting conventions between two venues. So even if they're nearby, that's going to be something that's a negative in the minds of meeting planners. And not to say that it can't be achieved or overcome, but then you start to look at do we put more rental discounts out as an incentive? And then also impacting on the expenses side in terms of labor and food service costs, just because you're looking at two different buildings. So, there are logistical factors that we sort of took into account when we were building this out. So even though, revenue is, only about close to what we see in the initial recommendation, expenses actually slightly exceed what we would project for the initial recommendation in terms of scenario 3. And so that's why you see that net operating loss of about 4.9 million, again relative to that initial recommendation. So those are key things to think about, and there are ways that you can sort of shift things around. For instance, if there was a parking lot associated with that satellite facility, that's another stream of revenue that isn't currently, accessed by Boise Center. So, not to say that this is sort of a final way to look at the financial component of this, but it is, these are, critical things to think about given, sort of the historical financial performance factors that we've looked at. And then,
real quick, I want to point out, before you go back to that slide real quick,
Absolutely.
I just want to point out to the board on this one in particular. So as you look at scenario 1, basically the subsidy need 4.8, 5.2, and 4.8, and just looking at the impact that phase 3 has as far as economic impact, total number of room nights, all of that for the same level of subsidy. That's the important part I want to just highlight to the board is one way or another. Option 1 is the lowest one, which is we have to shut down the convention center and rebuild, which we don't even have the land to do. So that's not even an option. This is the initial recommendation at that 2.6. What that gets us is the efficiencies of all one site. But anything else as scenario 1, 2, or 3, you're subsidizing at about the same amount, but 3 comes in much higher on economic impact, hotel night generation. So I just want to point that out.
Cody, you beat us to the punch with our
Sorry.
next slide here. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Cody. So yeah, that's exactly the next point is, if we think about this on a economic impact standpoint, scenario 1 is achieving almost 80% of the economic impact that we see as possible. Scenario 2 is about 72%, but scenario 3 is achieving about 93%. And that's all at, as Cody mentioned, similar levels of overall income subsidy. So, and those figures are essentially equivalent in terms of fiscal impact. So, I think that's why, as we think about key takeaways here, if achievable in a hypothetical world, yeah, that the initial recommendation would be the strongest solution. However, as Cody alluded to, the notion of tearing down and rebuilding Boise Center and the dark days associated with that, or expanding to a parcel of land that doesn't currently exist as available, that those factors really just sort of make that a pretty challenging thing to think as possible, at least in the near and midterm future. So then we'd see scenarios 1 and 2 offering, I would say only incremental gains. Incremental is perhaps a little bit too harsh. We're still talking about considerably more capacity than the existing Boise Center has. But the limits in terms of contiguous space and the relative to the investment required to achieve that, I think sort of points to those maybe not being ideal relative to scenario 3. Because once we get into phase 2 of scenario 3, we're getting, again, results that are close to the initial recommendation. I mentioned that about 2% of overall economic impact and fiscal impact, room nights, et cetera. With a similar level of subsidy to scenarios 1 and 2. And so, that's where we see scenario 3 as sort of offering that optimized long-term economic impact return and competitive positioning. So even though there's some operating challenges associated with this, there's a higher degree of complexity, when you're looking at sort of a satellite facility and a primary facility. There is, I think overall it points to that as the best solution from our standpoint.
And the other positive for scenario 3, in addition to providing the needed exhibit hall space, you're really building the sports tourism marketplace at a pretty substantial level. And that gives time to the surrounding communities to kind of, really think about how to work in tangent as an ecosystem, and how to really, take advantage of what you all are doing by that investment. Then as you shift really to focus more on the convention and trade show, it really provides a real opportunity for the whole region. So I think there's a regional context that's important for scenario 3 as well.
And then lastly here, just in terms of next steps, I know that the auditorium district is pursuing land acquisition that could possibly enable scenario 3. And then concurrently, and you all I'm sure are aware of this, but we're sort of in discussions with the auditorium district, the city, and also a set of local arts groups to further study performing arts center opportunity with that group of stakeholders. So lots of things to think about in terms of how those sort of intersect and interact. But that's sort of where things are going forward from our perspectives here. So with that all said, I'll pause, and really that's what we've prepared to share with you today, but happy to answer any questions or address any comments that the board may have.
I think one thing that I just wanted to point out, if anybody's listening saying, hey, you guys already bought the land, this seems like, your report's coming out now. The timing of this, we actually got the report before we pulled the trigger on the land. So Cody had this report prior to us doing the finalization of the land purchase. We're just now having the opportunity to present it publicly. So for anybody scratching their head wondering, gosh, this seems a little late. We did have this information prior to, but, right?
Now, just kind of highlight a couple things. I mean, obviously, the initial recommendation was the first report came back. That's kind of the pie in the sky. That's the opportunity I think that exists within the district if all things could line up with additional land adjacent to the Boise Center currently, or the lack of disruption that would be required to create that environment. So that's also the one. I know Sophie's not here today, but she had brought that up as a concern and also a benefit of finding the site that we did that's still close enough to the downtown, but in an area that won't be so disruptive to the activity that's already taking place that generates really great economic benefit. And so I do see that as kind of something just to pay attention to is that minus the initial recommendation, the land that we've secured kind of fits. And this was stuff that I remember when I told Johnson about the land that it was kind of almost like that is the perfect type of location that's proximity still close enough to the current convention center to allow us that kind of phase 3 option. And so I think we're set up very, very well. And I'll just kind of speak to that component minus the initial recommendation, which is, like I said, is the best return on investment, for lack of a better word, because it could be the most efficient if we were all on one site. I think this is an opportunity for the district here with the new site to really kind of set us up in a way. And then just speaking to that kind of sports tourism market, we all went through the time where we were chasing during COVID, whether it was cheer or dance or anything, having that exhibit hall space continues to be an option for us from a flexibility standpoint, no matter what happens in the economy, no matter what happens. And I'll use Salt Lake as the example. While Salt Lake may not be a tier 1 destination for sports because of the same reasons for cost and all the reasons that I brought up before, they're actually reconfiguring their exhibit hall right now to be more friendly to sports tourism because they're setting themselves up for that opportunity to be flexible. When markets change and there maybe is more conventions, they'll go after those. And when there's more opportunity for those weekend sports tourism options, they'll go after those. So.
Yeah, we see sports tourism as one of the most resilient event markets. And I'm sure many of you are parents or no parents, that's one of the last places that belts get tightened is spending on kids. So that's somewhere where we often recommend to clients, look at that as, even if your convention is your primary demand layer, that's your primary goal. It's really good to have that as an option. so that you have that sort of, backup if the convention market sort of takes a turn for the worse.
And I'll just kind of recognize Johnson's reputation within the industry. I know that the performing arts groups there would like to move forward on a second or a third scope of work, for lack of a better word, or at least get a proposal from Johnson on what that would look like, because they're impressed with the work that they've done so far. But also I think there's an opportunity for synergies here. Naturally, a lot of the footwork and the data that's exists within a feasibility study the Johnson group has already put together. So that should allow them to be able to provide a competitive proposal to the city and the performing arts groups. I've expressed interest in seeing what that looks like as well from the district side, because as part of this whole evaluation of opportunities in the land that we've secured, I think we want to be thinking larger and seeing who we can include and bring under that umbrella. And I know Performing Arts is doing a good job of getting organized on their end to see what they can do for a potential facility built with philanthropic dollars and some of their own dollars put together as well. So coming alongside the district at the same time, I think makes a lot of sense with the feasibility report.
So the city and the arts groups are funding that?
They're interested in finding out what the cost is to get this third scope of work, and then finding out what that cost would be and determining how much they can afford to pay for. Are we able to support some of it? Because it should be a pretty affordable cost comparatively to doing it independent of the work we just did.
Any other questions? Mike?
Can I just clarify that? Satellite facility or contiguous, whatever is that, since the land we are in the process of buying is 4 blocks away, I'm assuming that counts as a satellite facility,
Correct.
right?
Yes,
So
not contiguous space.
If it's literally not hand holding, it's a satellite facility.
Correct, yeah. Yeah, those phase 1 and phase 2 options, we're looking at the adjacent opportunity to either put an exhibit hall space up 40 to 60,000 square feet and then stacking it, or just one floor of it, but adjacent to the current facility.
Great. Anything else? All right,
Again,
John?
Johnson, thank you for your time and appreciate your guys' expertise.
Great. Thank you all. Appreciate
Thanks,
it.
everybody. Always a pleasure.
Okay, with that, I'd entertain, do I have to?
Yeah, I'd like to
motion
approve the report,
it
yeah.
and change it from draft to final?
So, second.
Great. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. All right, Brian, is he in the room? There you are. There you are.
Excellent.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Oh, you mean, it's a different clicker. Mine's attached to this one. Sorry. Yeah, please.
I understand.
Hi. Hey guys, oh, it's been a while.
Yeah, it's been a minute.
How's everybody doing?
Good.
It's been a busy year for us, which has been great. And we'll share some numbers up here and kind of talk through the various events that we've got, what's upcoming. We've kind of been the recipient of maybe some unfortunate circumstances around the Northwest, and we'll take it while we can. There's really only 3 facilities in the Northwest that can host substantial meets. Boise, Idaho Central Product Center being one of them. The others being in Federal Way, Washington, and the other in Gresham at Mountain Community College. There's a interpretation of law issue in Federal Way, which is making it impossible for USA Swimming to host large events there. So we have just we ended up hosting one in March. We'll host another one this coming July. We ended up hosting a collegiate meet in February. We're working on a long-term contract with that same conference. So we're kind of been the benefactor of that. Mountain Community College is actually going through renovation, which they're putting a retractable roof over it. And they were supposed to be open for the summer. They're not. So now we've landed 2 more meets that were not supposed to be on our schedule this summer. So all good things, except for maybe for my volunteer staff, who is going to get work to the bone in the summer. But it's been great for the facility. And the parking lot could not come sooner. That lot's going to get finished just in time for kind of the 3 largest meets of the year. So it's going to be well received, and we're very grateful for the commitment you guys have made in the facility and that change. So as Cody said, that's underway. It's great to see a lot of dirt getting moved. We had some storage sheds out there that they helped us move, and we got reconfigured and things are underway. So it's fun. Everyone seems to be kind of managing the discomfort of kind of losing a little space for the time being, knowing that it's more spaces are coming down the road. So like I said, whether it be swim teams or lap swimmers or lesson participants, everyone's pretty excited for that new lot. So appreciate that. Diving into some numbers, this is year to date, and we've taken all of the hotel data that we've got, participant data, and sent that over to Visit Boise, and they've produced kind of the impact numbers for us. Total impact, 3.6 million. Total room nights, 3,945. I want to point out that all of 2025, we are at 4,800 room nights. So we're 4 months in. This is just through the end of April. And we're well on our way to probably doubling that number. I think by the end of the year, we'll be pretty close to 8,000 room nights if we get the participation that we expect in these last few events. So we're very excited about that. Everything seems to be an upward curve. These events will be cyclical. We'll have years in which we'll have a lot of events, years in which we won't. But this is definitely going to be a higher year. Like I said, we've done a pretty good job of securing events going forward. We hosted, flip to this next screen so we kind of walk through some of the events we had. Starting with that meet in February, which was the Northwest Conference Championships. That is, D3 college conference with 9 different universities from throughout the Northwest. Had an excellent experience here. They have re-upped for 2027, and we are currently working on a long-term arrangement for potentially 28, 29, and 2030. So excited about that relationship. That's going well. Northwest Speedo Sectionals was another large meet that we kind of got defaulted to. And we will host another one of those Speedo Sectional meets in July of this year that will bring close to 600 swimmers into Boise. And of course, all their parents and coaches, everything with it. So those have been great for us. We actually created a new meet called the Mountain West Age Group Championships. This was the first year of that. And we brought swimmers from multiple states. Again, we've already got commitments that exceed 500 kids for this next year. So that will be an ongoing meet that will live in Boise, Idaho. There's currently one in Seattle and one in California that are all age group centric meets. And both of those host over 1,200 kids each year. And so they're a little oversubscribed. So that's our objective, is to try to create a third meet that kind of balances that out. So long term, we see that as a 600 to 700 swimmer event. And so we're going to keep working on that for the next few years and kind of grow that one as kind of a mainstay here in Boise. The water polo events have been great. That Mountain Madness water polo tournament, this is the second year that USA Water Polo has come in for that. They have worked very closely with Lucas and Visit Boise team in promoting those events, and it sounds like they're trying to keep that one scheduled going forward and work on some potential other USA Water Polo events. And then, of course, this weekend we've just got a small meet with Sawtooth Aquatic Club, which is one of our clubs in the facility, hosting a small event that will bring swimmers throughout Idaho to the valley. Going forward, this is where we kind of get into some of our larger events. So we are hosting the second year in a row our Paralympic Nationals. It's not a big event in terms of the number of athletes, but in part, those athletes come with multiple support people. So for every swimmer, there's usually 2 or 3 support people that may need to help that swimmer in and out of the water with their wheelchairs, with their whatever disability they may have. It's truly a very inspiring event. These are people that may have been born with this disability, or there's several that have lost limbs, in the military careers that have took up swimming. It's one of those things that if you haven't seen it, you should pencil in one of those days to come out of the facility and watch a session of the meet, because you won't. It's pretty impressive. I know I talked about it a little bit last year, but there's a local young man, this local, that has no arms and no legs and dives in and swims, right? I mean, it's pretty incredible. So that's a lot of fun. That's coming up here just in a couple of weeks. Then in July, we get really busy. We have that Speedo Sectional Championships. We'll have swimmers from basically 15 of the 17 Western states, really excluding California is kind of the one that gets kind of excluded from the group. That'll be a big meet. We have what's called our Snake River Swimming Summer Championships. Those are more local Idaho, Nevada swimmers. And then again, another massive age group championship meet, which will be all 17 Western states. We've held that one a couple times in the past as well. So we have a lot of events coming up. Again, that hopefully will continue to, add that economic impact number and hotel nights for us and get closer to kind of what we think is going to be an ongoing goal, trying to hit that 10,000 hotel night kind of barrier that we kind of projected originally. So kind of going into the fall, we've got another big high school meet. We've got Thanksgiving meets. University of Idaho is continues to host a collegiate invite that brings college teams from throughout the United States, which has been a lot of fun. That one's growing. Again, just we're starting to get a lot of regular events that we can rely on every year. And then we're trying to go out and place bids to add kind of these supplemental meets that are in there. And the ones that we bid on are usually larger events. So trying not to get, fortunately and unfortunately, we've got a bunch of them this year, but ideally we can land one or two of these each year because they do require a significant number of volunteer hours. And we kind of keep that on a regular basis and start to see a little better consistency with it. Any questions on any events that we've got?
How is volunteers working for you guys? You guys get good turnout for volunteers, or is it just depending on?
We really do. I mean, we've got, the club teams, obviously, they're participating. And so their parents are involved. What we're trying to do now is what you start to see when you do those meets, there are a lot of parents of kind of the older kids, those 16, 17, 18-year-olds that are heavily involved because they've been at it the longest. And now we're trying to get the parents of the younger kids involved. Phil knows all about this because he's been through it many years ago. But to get the younger kids involved so they can kind of graduate up, because pretty soon all these kids that are in high school are going to graduate, and those parents are not going to want to spend their weekends at swimming pool anymore. So we need those younger parents to kind of step up. So we are kind of starting that process of training a lot of the younger parents, and we do have a great volunteer community, and we do host really good events, and so we're just trying to maintain that reputation and keep getting the meets back here.
We helped participate in the Paralympic event. Me and Mary Mike went over to the facility, and it's just a really cool environment. Can't speak enough about the amount of motivation that you get from watching those folks swim. So
it's a really cool deal. I just put a couple other notes on here. I mean, we talked about the parking lot already. One thing we're actually looking at are purchasing kind of temporary changing rooms. We have plenty of bathroom space, but what we don't have, when they have these large meets, these kids have $600 or $700 what they're called tech suits, and they're technical suits, and they take 10 to 15 minutes to get on, and they like to be in their individual stalls in private when they do it because they're squeezing them onto their legs and everything else, and so bathrooms get a little backed up. So we are exploring essentially, if anyone's been to the AC Boise games, right, and they've got the shipping containers that are converted into suites and bathrooms, and we're exploring those that we'll put on the backside, kind of on the turf area, where we can have, essentially a module training or changing rooms that can be unisex, and hopefully we can get one of those in time for those July events. So we'll kind of have an answer on that in the next 7 to 10 days if we can get that accomplished, and that'll be a good addition just for all of our meets. But one thing that we're looking at, lesson season is, summer season always kicks off. The goal of the program is not only to increase participation, but obviously to get people to understand that you can't just take lessons for the summer and then stop and go away. If kids that get in the water and only take lessons for a couple of weeks, and then they will lose those skills. We have a perpetual lesson program. We want kids to be in the lesson and work their way through it. That's the way they become more self-sufficient, better swimmers. But we have seen definitely an uptick in registrations, usually due in the summer. And our goal will be to kind of keep those people invested in the program and continue to participate throughout the year. The summer is nice because we're able to offer multiple sessions rather than just those afternoon time slots. We can do a morning or kind of an early afternoon session because kids are not in school, and then we continue with those afternoon time slots. One thing I didn't put on here, and I always like to bring up, is there's the benefits that come beyond just a swimming pool. Kids that have kind of moved through programs within our facility and moved on, athletes that have received athletic or academic scholarships at MIT, University of Michigan, of course, University of Idaho, American University, George Washington. We're starting to see kids really get out in the community. They're all kind of graduates of this facility. Kids that are, swimming at national championship meets. We've got an athlete that will represent the United States at the University of America Games this summer. So it's cool to start to see kids that have been in this facility. We've only been at it for 3 years now, going out in the real world and kind of making their own names for themselves. So it's a really cool deal, and we're kind of chugging away at it. Any questions at all for me?
Any questions, comments?
When you have more of the meets, how do you balance that with your lesson demand? How do you, when you see years like this?
It is tough, and this summer is tough because we're gonna end up where we have, multiple weeks where we have to take away from those lesson plans. But a lot of it is budget driven. That's one of the challenges, of course. So, if we're gonna have a meet, they've got to pay rent. And that rent far exceeds what we would bring in from a lesson revenue standpoint. So we have to balance that. But in all honesty, I don't like seeing the schedule the way it is right now, because I do think there's too many weeks kind of in a row or close to in which we have to put a halt on the lesson program for an event. The reality is we were kind of put in a position this year, if we didn't have an event, then all of those swimmers throughout the Western US don't have a home. So, we kind of felt like we needed to step up and do that. But I think to your point, Cody, in the future, we want to be much more balanced in that so that we don't have to cancel lessons. At the end of the day, we definitely make more money in the events.
Okay, that sounds curious. Okay.
The adjacent landowners excited about the parking lot being finished? Is there a bit more conflict there with the?
We really, honestly haven't had too many issues. Our immediate neighbor on one side is Sapodine. They have just been incredible neighbors. They're wonderful people, and they've been really great to work with. I'm sure they will appreciate having more spots. They don't seem to have too many conflicts, but when they do, we get it addressed. On the opposite side, the truck stop, which is now a 1-9, which is Jackson's, they've been really gracious and allowed us to use some parking spaces during some of our events. So that really hasn't been an issue. Really, the only one that kind of becomes a hurdle is the shopping center across, and we just continue to be respectful as best we can. They put up their signage, and I'm sure they'll be excited that we have more parking on our side of the street.
And it's about doubling the spots, correct?
It is, yes. It is. And it will allow right now, we don't let buses come into our parking lot because they can't really make it all the way around. There's dirt on one side. So now it'll allow buses to drive through, drop somethers off, and drive all the way out the other side. So we don't have buses and traffic stopping on Finley.
There's some staging parking along the front. If you guys want to bring in food trucks or you use it for something else, there's some additional parking that'll be in the front that they'll have access to control.
And we're restriping some of the spaces on the.
The ADA sides, we're getting a couple spots there because we're restriping them, and then we're also putting some striping in front of the compactor or the trash area to avoid the people that sometimes park there. Chelsea has to go chase them.
Correct. Yeah. So we have more ADA spaces than we're really required. So they kind of recalculated, and so they'll truncate those and put those really in the front where the primary entrance is. And then we have 2 ADA spots in the back that really were never being used because it's not an entrance really to the facility. So those will be converted to just normal parking spaces.
And then that whole ability for just to do the U, that's going to create a lot of opportunity for fire trucks, for access for school buses or whatever the buses that they need to get in and out. So, yeah. Thank you. Appreciate your help.
Yeah.
Great.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Great, thanks. Okay, Cody, your matrix.
Last piece is just kind of more information than anything. I don't need a necessarily approval process, but part of the strategic plan, one of the strategic priorities of the board was kind of an evaluation matrix tool for the board, but also for the exploratory committee to use as groups come to us and say, hey, we've got this project. Now that we've got this additional data from Johnson, I've got a more narrowed scope that you guys have here. And then also I have, and I'll share it with the group if it didn't get shared, I don't think it did, but one that takes the original kind of Johnson full, all of the different offerings. And then this one that you have in front of you is the more narrow scope. And I'll just explain this to you. And I know, TM, you got this emailed to you before the meeting. But that first one on the far left is the convention center expansion. Down at the bottom, the reason that's red is because that's just not viable. We don't have the land opportunity to be able to do that. But again, that's the kind of pie in the sky where the biggest opportunity exists for efficiencies and for return on investment. But I think that this is just a clear indicator that kind of that large phased offsite facility, downtown core, all of that is the next best option. But I think also to John's comment, this incremental growth is still very viable, still very successful for the district to consider. Incremental growth versus transformational growth are the two words I've been using with the board in particular. The options 1 and 2 inside the Johnson report are on the far right columns of that. And then that one that's there, it says large phased offsite, is the phased out approach, which is option 3. It really just kind of shows you the value. And I want to kind of highlight the financial sustainability piece because this could be considered a little confusing. So I put a little note at the bottom, more arrows equals less subsidy needed. So meaning that the project type of those types that have more arrows, they are going to get subsidized at a lower rate overall, long term. But it's a clear indicator. And then what I will have as a part of this as a backup that goes with it is some analytics using the Johnson's report that you can start to kind of put in as we get some ideas about potential product opportunities or projects that the district could consider. We can start plugging in, what does the community benefit look like? And that's a little bit of a harder one to put a thumb on, but the ones that we can really start to like put metrics into are economic impact generation, hotel night generation, and financial sustainability. And then flexibility is kind of a little bit of a decision point by myself as an operator determining what that facility type would be flexible and how we could book it. But really those three metrics in the middle are the ones that the KPIs that I want to be able to make sure that as the exploratory committee, other groups continue to reach out to us even since our land has been acquired and saying, hey, we want to circle back. Ones that initially engaged as part of the stakeholder engagement have come back to the table. So I want to be able to have a metric and a tool as what we talked about per the strategic plan. So this is kind of the high level visual tool, but there is an analytical component that exists beneath this that kind of runs numbers and uses Johnson's kind of forecasting models to get us to some estimates. So no approval needed. This is just, again, it was part of the strategic plan. I wanted the board to see that we've got this piece at least done on the first phase of it, because I think this is kind of an easy first ask with the most recent scope of work from Johnson, but now the analytics as we get into this. And then I'll just kind of also speak to next steps. Looking at a test fit site design is kind of one of the RFQs I'd like to put out. I know I originally spoke to the board about potentially putting out and getting our design team going, which could be an owner's rep and a potential site design. After speaking to some of my counterparts and knowing that we have this feasibility study along with our land, I've gotten some examples of other places where they basically have gone out to RFP or RFQ and said, I want to test fit. I'm going to take the data that's inside the feasibility study under these options and take the site that we've got and start to kind of give us some options and some pricing and some kind of get creative, think about it, play with it a little bit, and then have that come back to the board as the first scope before we really get into the nitty gritty. I think that makes a lot of sense, knowing that the timing we've got with tenants on the site, the ability to kind of really take our time and do this right. And so I'll be presenting that next board meeting to the board, but I think that is the right way to go because it doesn't really commit us to anything as far as a design team. We could continue to work with those folks if we like them in that process. But at the end of the day, at least it gets us, and I've got some examples that I'll share with the board. I know I shared with Kristen as well from other opportunities that came out with some drawings, some kind of high level stuff, and then they could scale up or scale down depending on what they saw from those reports. So that's my next steps.
Anything else? Any questions? All right, seeing no other business before the board, the meeting's adjourned.
Record ones.
Were we